fevereiro de 2021 e finalmente eu consigo trazer para vocês o segundo episódio da série Developers Pub. Nunca achei que seria tão difícil convencer os nossos core developers a gravar as entrevistas, mas parece que eles são bem tímidos. Mas fico feliz de trazer uma entrevista com a Ann Harrison. Para quem usa o Firebird já há algum tempo, deve se lembrar dela nas listas de discussão. A Ann era conhecida como a mãe do Interbase e, consequentemente, do Firebird. Ela é casada com o Jim Starkey, que foi o criador do Interbase, e trouxe para a gente nessa entrevista muita informação legal daquela época, desde o Interbase até o nascimento do Firebird. Acho que vocês vão curtir bastante. Deixem nos comentários sugestões de nomes que vocês gostariam que eu entrevistasse para os próximos episódios. E não esqueça de curtir o vídeo, assine o canal e vamos lá! Hello, and thank you so much for joining me in the second episode of the Developers Pub series. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think for a start, you can tell us about yourself. Well, where were you born? Where do you live? What you have been doing lately?
Okay. I was born in Eastern Massachusetts. I live in Eastern Massachusetts. I have lived other places, including France, briefly. I lived in France between high school and college. The local high school, I actually lived in the same town I'm now living in. My local high school ran out of courses for me. So I graduated in 3 years because the alternative was staying to take gym. And I didn't think that was going to be fun. And they didn't think it was going to be fun having me around doing that either. So I went to the University of Grenoble in France, which has had a special school for foreign students who want to go to French universities. And you could theoretically start there knowing no French, and in about 18 months, assuming that you had a reasonable educational background, you could go to a French university. I was there for a little less than 12 months and came back and went to university in the States. After university, I didn't have much of an idea what I wanted to do or what I was what I could get hired for. It's hard to imagine, but when I got out of university, the help wanted ads were help wanted male and help wanted female. Help wanted female was secretarial. I'm a terrible typist. Cleaning, and random minor stuff. For a while, I was the office manager of a public sailing club in Boston, where I met, indirectly, I met Jim. Jim is my husband, for those of you who don't know, Jim Starkey. He was working for Computer Corporation of America at the time. This was 1975 or 76, late 75. We eventually shed our then, yes, partners, and I started living with him. We got engaged, and by that time he was working for DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. It was a big thing in the day. DEC decided that they were going to send the engineering group to New Hampshire. Now, those of you who don't live in New England don't understand exactly how far down you go when you move from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to New Hampshire. New Hampshire is like living in a pig farm, from the point of view of somebody who lives in Cambridge. no Chinese restaurants. Basically, no restaurants other than diners. So, Jim, we weren't anxious to move to New Hampshire, and Jim was particularly not anxious to move to New Hampshire. I didn't have a job at the time. I was trying to get a job doing fundraising for Catholic juvenile delinquents. So Jim announced to his boss that he wasn't going to move because his fiance, his special friend, would have a very hard time finding a suitable job in New Hampshire.
Fiance, close.
We were fiance.
Yeah.
Okay, fiance. And 2 days later, I had interviews with 4 departments at DEC. And I got a job as what was called a release assistant.
Release engineer.
Release engineer. That was engineering in the sense that I had a license to run a mechanical elevator, and I carried discs and tapes and paper tape and all, around from office to office. Well, that lasted
in the mill.
In the original home of DEC. At the time, it really was a marginally converted, linen, wool mill. And the floors were full of lanolin, and on a hot day, the tar came down through the roof. But it was a fun place. And the manager of the COBOL group, recognized that I was not really suited to be a release engineer. And he needed somebody to organize his bug reports. He was about 3 years behind. So I started organizing his bug reports. I started reproducing the easier of the bug reports. We were regularly spending from about 7 till about midnight, sometimes later. And he said, well, I need a report writer. You don't have anything better to do. Why don't you write a report writer? At the time, everything was written in assembler. So he gave me the PDP-11 assembler handbook.
And the processor handbook.
And the processor handbook, and suggested that I write a spec for a report writer. I decided that was not going to work. But his boss's boss, came by and said, we're developing a text editor that's supposed to be used by naive users. Okay, what? I'm a naive user for that. And I opened the book, and on the second page, it said, here's how you set up your text buffers. And I wrote in the margin, what's a text buffer? Something you use to polish text? And the writer didn't speak to me for 3 years. Peter Garrison, for what it's worth. Then I decided, well, I'll just try it. I mean, I can figure out a few commands. And the next thing I did was open up a file and typed in Anne loves Jim. And then I said, okay, replace Anne with Anne loves Jim. And nothing happened for a while. And then a mad horde came back to see me because I had just filled the disk of the development system that was used by the database group, the COBOL group,
Fortran,
RSX. There were a lot of people who were really mad because I had just crashed the central database, central computer. A couple of days later, I managed to break a $100,000 printer. That indicated that I had talent in the debugging area. And my COBOL group leader gradually had me doing not just reproducing problems, but using a debugger and figuring out where the problem was and fixing minor problems. And then 2 years later, I was a senior engineer and in charge of a database project on the PDP-11. Jim and DEC came to an unpleasant parting. I went to work for Apollo for a while. When we didn't need my salary, I joined Jim's company, and that became Interbase. And
Groton Database Systems.
it started out, as Jim points out, as Groton Database Systems.
Yeah.
We were living in a town called Groton. That's Groton.
Mm-hmm.
Nice place. I was with Interbase through the acquisition by Ashton Tate. When Borland bought Ashton Tate, they decided to move everybody to California. I wasn't interested. Neither of us was interested in moving to California. Let's see. At that point, we started another company in the mid 90s. I didn't have much to do when Jim was starting companies because he's in his corner writing code. So I was bored, and then I joined the Interbase email group and started answering questions. It eventually got me in trouble because I knew answers that they didn't know, and they didn't like that. Then there's the whole saga of how Interbase became Firebird, and I'll take the whole half hour if I go into that one.
Yeah, you already answered a lot of questions that I would ask further. But I have one more. The question is, why to develop a new database? Did you face some big problem that the others' databases didn't work well?
Yeah, at DEC, and part of the unpleasant separation, DEC decided that first DEC knew that relational databases were never going anywhere. They were slow. They'd be fine for data analysis, but they couldn't possibly be used for anything real time. Jim had just launched DataTree, which was a huge thing. It was the DEC's most popular layered product. And they decided that he could have a year to do whatever he wanted. And what he did was write a relational database. There wasn't any such thing at DEC. And this was back far enough so that there was Oracle and there was Ingress. And there were a lot of things that were innovative about Jim's relational database. But the most important one was that it used multi-version concurrency. Other databases had used record locks or page locks or, say, table locks to preserve consistency in a multi-user environment. And the problem with all of those is to get serious consistency, you have to hold both read and write locks on whatever element you're locking. And that means that very little gets done because everybody is waiting for locks. And sooner or later, there's a deadlock and everybody gets back. And multi-version concurrency allowed absolute read consistency for multiple transactions without having writers wait for readers. And that was a big thing. Jim eventually got his thing sort of working. There was a benchmark between the codicil database group, which DEC had, and Jim's database, and for a very simple application. And Jim's database showed very well. He'll tell you, did it win or did it just?
It was within 2 or 3% running with 10 buffers.
It were 10 1K page buffers. And that got DEC's attention. So the brilliant managers there decided, well, we should have a relational database group. Did they say, Jim, why don't you build a relational database since you've got most of one? No, they appointed somebody else to do it. And the two groups went side by side as soon as the other one was running well enough. The other one was lock-based and basically started out as a relational layer over the codicil database and gradually morphed away. And they promised that there would be a runoff between the two databases. And that kept getting pushed off because the official project couldn't beat Jim's project. And the test didn't make extreme use of high concurrency, but this went on for a very long and unpleasant time. And, each product was getting ready to ship, and only one of them was supposed to ship, and they both shipped. And he was, I think, 2/3, maybe more than that, of the senior engineers on both projects left the company within 4 months of the decision to not make a decision.
And the committee.
And the people on the committee that were supposed to be the judges. The big idea that Jim had was multi-version concurrency. There were also blobs and just triggers, just tons of stuff.
Didn't do triggers then.
That Oracle didn't have. So that was the idea that caused us to go off in 83,
Yeah, something.
something like that, and start another company.
84.
We had friends at Apollo, which I mentioned earlier. It was a workstation company. They were looking for a database that they could private label. Basically, JRD, which was the DEC project, also known as RDB Elan, was too good an idea to leave behind. So that's why Jim developed another database.
When Interbase got open source, did you still work for Borland in that time?
No.
No?
Well, I did again, actually. I had been involved with Firebird from 1996 on, with the help list, and going to the occasional BorCon. Interbase was part of Borland's portfolio, but those were really go times. Everything had to be huge. It had to grow fast. The Interbase was profitable, but it wasn't growing fast. And the idea came around that, here's a great opportunity. Because open source was just beginning to really flower. We'll make Interbase open source. At the time, for reasons that I can't quite recall, the Interbase group reported directly to Dale Fuller, who was the CEO of Borland. And that's hard. I mean, each individual engineer reported to somebody who was much too busy to pay any attention. And they were, frankly, not doing a real good job. So I got hired as a manager with the idea of getting the project ready to be released as open source. Now that would have required finding somebody who was attractive to venture capitalists, which I am not. While they looked for a CEO, I tried to do what I could to get Interbase into shape that it could be spun off as an open source project and suddenly become tremendously valuable. And then it got to be the end of '99, and the market, the .com market crashed. And Borland decided that on the whole, having a profitable project was a good thing. So it was quite decent of them to actually release the sources so that it could be an independent project, an independent company. So there we were, me, Paul Beach, a couple of others, and the source code. Maybe some builds, but no test system, no documentation. Yeah, so it's done pretty well considering that it started out as a single CD of sources.
And after that, what can you tell us about the backstage? I mean, what was going on between Interbase getting open source and Firebird born?
Interbase is still, well, I think it's still around. It's been sold a couple of times, but it exists. Firebird, Firebird's launch was awkward. We had some volunteers. They changed it. They updated the code base from C to C+, and took a fair number of Interbase customers with them, who were reasonably patient while we got, the basics. There was IB Phoenix, which is a commercial company. And then there's the Firebird Foundation. And we had to decide on a license. And then we had to fight with the open source consortium about the license. And a little later, we had to fight with I'm suppressing the name of the overall company, but they wanted to introduce a database called They wanted to
Mozilla.
Browser.
browser, yes, called Firebird, and that's the only time in my life I have ever got death threats. And eventually, somebody from Debian stepped in and said, "No, Mozilla, you cannot stomp on this database. They were here first. You pick another name.
Or you don't go on our distribution.
Or you don't go on our distribution." And it was a very awkward and unpleasant time. It was really nice to have the support of companies and support organizations like yours that wanted to see Firebird succeed. And I think it's, it isn't, we hoped it would be, but it's done pretty damn well to be around for 20 years.
Did you ever write code in Firebird?
I wrote some code at the beginning. I was mostly working in other areas. The conversion to C+ was not to my taste. And had there not been so much confusion at the beginning, I would have liked to have taken a stronger position on code standards, things like that. But no, basically, I continued answering people's problems. In parallel, I was working with Jim on his various. I was going to trade shows, not a lot, not enough, promoting Firebird. I was more valuable explaining to people how stuff worked.
Yeah.
In fact, I like finding the obscure bug and fixing it. And usually fixing the bug reduces the code.
Well, let's get some memories back. In 2005, I think it was in the second FDD, you and Jim came to Brazil to speak at the conference. And what were your expectations and what the memories you keep from that time?
Oh, that was the most wonderful thing. It really was.
A lot of people think that coming to Brazil, they will find a lot of monkeys in the streets and things like that.
Piracicaba, which I knew about because I knew you, would be a big city in the United States. We live in a town of 5,000 people. The conference and having people, going to the radio station, and it was just a real high point for us. People lining up to have their pictures taken. It was just, and the moment when, oh God, of course I've suppressed his name. We had somebody from the audience, a longtime Firebird user and a wonderful guy, step up and say, "I'm sorry, the professor of computer science who was trying to do the translations is just stuck on the specific vocabulary of our database."
Yeah.
And
it was Mauricio.
Mauricio. And he was great.
Yes.
That was wonderful.
It was Just
He saved
yeah. Jim says divine intervention. I say Deus ex machina. He could easily have come down from the clouds.
I met him several times after that, and he came to speak at FTD several years after that. I think right now he doesn't work with Firebird anymore. But he's a wonderful person. He wrote some Delphi books in the past, but he really saved the talk.
Oh.
The full talk is record. And I remember the previous translator, the professor, when we started to speak about database corruption, he looked at and he said something like this. Well, she's talking about corruption, but as far as I know, corruption is related to politicians. And so after I heard that, I thought, oh my God, no. And it was maybe a few seconds after that, or maybe a few minutes, that Mauricio came to me and said, well, if you want, I can help in the translation. Please go there. And after that, I think it was about 2 or 3 minutes. The other translator just went out, and Mauricio stayed until the end of the conference and saved the conference, actually. And he has a really big memory, because I remember in your talk, and in your talk, you spoke slowly and you paused a lot of times, so it was really easy to translate. But in Jim's talk, in Jim's talk, I think he forgot that there was a translator. So he started to speak and spoke for 5 or 6 minutes, and I was looking to Mauricio, how this guy will translate all this. He will not remember everything. And when Jim finally stopped talking, Mauricio just came in and blah, 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 blah. Well, he spoke everything. The guy has really a good memory. He really saved the conference. Thank you, Mauricio. Yeah. You'll probably watch this video, so thank you. So thank you for being there, and it was really nice to meet you, to go to the radio with you, and you were like rock stars here, right? Interviews.
We have never felt like rock stars any other time in our lives, and it was a hoot. It was really wonderful.
Where did the passion for boats and sailings come from?
My father was a sailor. I was hanging around in boatyards as I was learning to walk. I have sailed all my life, and one of the things that was interesting to me about Jim when I first met him is that he was, I think at that moment, trying to decide whether he was going to buy a boat or move to California. And I convinced him to buy a boat.
Well, I remember in the past, especially when Firebird, was born, you were very active in the discussion lists, in the support list, and you started to be known by the name of the mother of Interbase Firebird. Did it bother you at all?
No. I prefer to think of myself as the godmother, but it's that was a long time ago, but one of the things I really enjoyed was exchanging opinions with Diane Brown. She used to work for Cognos, who was a big customer. And she was on the Relational Database Standards, the SQL Standards Committee. So
secret decoder ring.
She had the secret decoder ring, and she could explain what the committee was trying to say. She died a couple of years ago. It was very sad.
Sad.
And I miss her. I miss, frankly, all of those discussions. That was just fun.
Well, I personally want to thank you a lot because you helped so many people, including me, in that time. You were very active in the supporting list. And I remember when you reply about something, probably anyone could make a book just with your answer, because it was always full of details and very well explained. So thank you a lot for spending so much time in helping people around.
Oh, I got a lot out of it. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you very much for being with me today and to bring us all those memories. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Have a nice night. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been enormously fun. We should do this privately sometime.
Yeah, for sure. It will be much better. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Much. Good night. See ya.
Okay. I was going someplace. Oh, and I've completely forgotten. What was your question?
The question is